Hey, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
I got a theory I want to try out on you.
Okay.
You know, I think yesterday Porter Goss, the head of the CIA, insisted that the CIA does not engage in torture. And he said that it does, though, collect information in, quote, unique and innovative ways. And there's been a certain amount of speculation about what those are what those code words are for. And I have a theory about what they mean. You know, no one has ever denied that our website is unique and innovative, and I think in certain circles, Blogging Heads TV has become virtually synonymous with the phrase unique and innovative. And I'm just wondering if he is kind of sending a signal.
That we're used as a torture device?
No, that's not what I had in mind.
Sorry.
Okay, stick with me here.
Okay.
Sending a signal that the CIA increasingly relies for its insights into the world on you and me, okay? That the agents are monitoring our show, and you know, this would be a way of kind of reassuring the intelligentsia, the cognoscente, if you will, that the country's fundamentally in good hands, and I know I sleep better at night knowing that you and I are basically at the top of the hierarchy here.
That would explain a lot of the CIA's judgments over the past few months.
Well, actually, you know, we weren't around during most of these misjudgments, you know, and I don't think that's a coincidence, you know. I don't believe in coincidence.
No wonder they went so wrong. That also explains the massive hits that we're getting according to our stat programs.
Oh, yeah.
It's really an artifact
Blows me away.
Of the government's interests.
Blows me away.
Cool.
So, let's see what other. I've got another theory. Or wait, do you have a theory?
No, I just think it's amusing that the CIA and the FBI are the most important liberal institutions left in our country. Since they're the ones that have been pushing back against the Bush initiatives. They're being the.
But you view almost every institution as a liberal institution, Mickey.
No, it's true. They're the anti-Bush power centers, and they were the two historically most vilified institutions by the left. And they're all that the left has left. If only the FBI will save us.
Well, that's an interesting point, but maybe that's just a comment on how far to the right this administration is. Maybe it's not the CIA that's been changing over the years.
Well, it's a comment on how out of power liberal Democrats are. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
a poignant comment it is. Go ahead.
You know, yesterday you were... What were you doing? You were arguing that Dick Cheney's comments about where he's trying to stigmatize those who would question the administration's motivation in leading us into the war or its honesty. You were saying those comments were kind of politically ill-advised. We both agreed that they were a little out of line when he says it's illegitimate to suggest that the administration misled anybody consciously. But you further argued that they didn't make sense politically?
They don't make sense politically to me, yes. Okay. I think they're ineffective.
Okay, I'm going to try to put them in a context that sheds at least a little light on them, okay? I basically think what he's trying to do is paint with such a broad brush, or stigmatize with such a broad brush, as to discourage any deep investigation into the administration's handling of information before the war. Because he knows that even if it didn't reveal conscious dishonesty, it would reveal a kind of unconsciously dishonest groupthink and kind of just extreme ineptitude or something like that. But anyway, I want to step back and set what I think is the current rhetorical context in which he's operating, and I want to do that by reference to a couple of clips I saw on the PBS NewsHour with Jim Lehrer last night. One of them is of retired Marine General Bernard Traynor, and here he is.
But, you know, we went in there as a military force to take out Saddam Hussein and to also to establish some sort of a democratic regime there, and the larger one of kind of reordering the deck chairs out there in the Middle East. I think all of that has gone by the board. Right now we just want to get out of there with some sort of a stable, legitimate government in place.
Okay, so one thing Traynor is saying is, all the basically the aims that we went to war for have been dashed. It just didn't work, and at this point it's damage control. Now, the bad news for the administration is not just that this is a respected retired general saying this. It's that this is the general that was on the side of the Bush administration in this particular debate, because what they were arguing about is whether we should withdraw the troops. And on the other side was General John Odom, another retired general who thinks we should. Traynor thinks we shouldn't, but even Traynor was conceding that, look, it's gotten down to the lesser of two evils. This thing has gone so seriously awry. And here's a clip in which he boils that down more concisely.
Us being there is a problem. We're creating a problem. The question is, are we creating a bigger problem than would be created if we left there?
Okay. So you get my point so far?
Well, we'll leave it to PBS to pick a pro-Bush debater who's really anti-Bush.
Well,
so
first of all,
somebody who thinks the Iraq War is a total disaster, and somebody who thinks it's a mild disaster on the side of the Iraq War.
First of all,
they could have picked somebody who was a more forceful advocate, I think.
Well, the way it happened, and I think if you're reading some kind of deep liberal bias into the PBS NewsHour, I think you may have gone over the edge. But I really think they work hard to be even-handed. And in this case, the way it happened was, look, John Odom, by your own account, is the spokesman of the day for the withdraw now scenario. So they had him on, one general. So they wanted to go find a general who opposed withdrawal. And they settled on Bernard Traynor, one of the premier intellectual retired generals floating around there. Anyway, the better response to what you've just said is to show you something that Dick Cheney said, because I would argue that increasingly he's almost starting to depict this thing as if it's a matter of damage control. It isn't just the general that PBS happened to pick. Here's what he said. I think he was speaking at AEI the other day. Here it is.
Would the United States and other free nations be better off or worse off with Zarqawi, bin Laden, and Zawahiri in control of Iraq? Would we be safer or less safe with Iraq ruled by men intent on the destruction of our country?
Okay, well, everybody who's been paying attention knows that the things he's worried about were certainly not threats before the administration started this war. Bin Laden wasn't going to be running Iraq back then, and Zarqawi wasn't either. And even if Iraq was then run by somebody who would like to destroy America, we now know he certainly didn't have the means. He didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. So far as we can tell, he wasn't in bed with any powerful terrorists. So in a way, what Cheney is doing is saying, look, at this point, let's at least not make things worse than they were before we launch this war. So in a certain sense, he's arguing damage control. Although, I'm sure he, if pressed, he would at least claim that a very rosy outcome is possible. But the point is, the rhetorical context in which he's operating reduces him to this, because increasingly this is what the argument is about. Almost across the board, there's almost nobody arguing that the war, as it was prosecuted, was a good idea. The question is, how did we wind up with such a bad idea? That is, the Bush administration's decision to invade and the way it chose to invade. And I think back to Cheney's attempt to stigmatize people who would look into Bush's honesty, it's an attempt to shut down a whole path of inquiry into the administration's pre-war handling of information. Well, Cheney's trying to conflate the two issues. He's saying, look, it's okay to argue about whether withdrawal is a good thing. I accept that. What's not okay is to accuse the president of conscious dishonesty. Well, there's a third thing in there that he's just not talking about, and he wants it to be conflated with the latter of those two things. And the third thing is just that there was this kind of collective dishonesty, incredible ineptitude, and he does not want to see any kind of investigation into the administration's motivation or frame of mind going into the war.
I agree that that's what he's trying to do. I deny that it's effective. It would be much more effective if he could show results in Iraq that were good, and if he could say, look, if we stick around, we're going to have these good results. And I agree that it's a tremendous change if he's not saying that anymore. If he's just saying, look, we have to avoid these really horrible results. I deny that. I don't believe that is his posture.
That's not his official
think he's
posture, but it's increasingly what he's forced to emphasize.
If so, then Bill Clinton is a much more forceful spokesman for the Bush position than Cheney, then, because Clinton said we should not talk about withdrawal until after the elections because there's still a chance to make it work. And by make it work, I think he meant make the invasion worth it because we've established some government in Iraq that's better than what it was before. And I haven't seen any argument to the contrary that's convincing. I mean, the representatives of the various Iraqi factions have been meeting in Cairo. They jointly decided in a concession to the Sunnis that they wanted us to leave on a timetable. That's fine. If they get together, they reach an accommodation, they decide to kick us out. Why isn't that a good outcome? General Odom,
we've argued about this. It's not a good outcome because, we've killed tens of thousands of Iraqi civilians. They all have relatives who are not at all happy and not favorably disposed towards Americans. These are all potential supporters of terrorism. Some of them have become terrorists. We know that.
But if we've established a crude working democracy in Iraq, that's a huge achievement in the Middle East, and that might be worth a few lives.
But again, you look at Odom's argument, and I wasn't blown away by it as it unfolded on the PBS NewsHour. But it's interesting. It's even if you don't accept it, it's kind of depressing. I mean, his scenario is: look, the civil war is underway. Let the Shiites beat the Sunnis, which will involve the death of a lot of Sunnis, as he accepts, and then there won't be any place for Al-Qaeda in Iraq because the Shiites don't like Al-Qaeda. Well, that's depressing because, first of all, how do you make sure it doesn't spin out of control into a regional war, given how many natural allies the Sunni people of Iraq have in that region? But I've got to say that I think he's kind of right. The Civil War is underway. Even David Brooks conceded that the other day, and it's kind of you don't notice it for two reasons. One is that the Shiite side of the Civil War is being done kind of covertly by people in uniform under the authority of the state. They are getting their payback in ways that we don't see on TV.
Why do you assume that the Sunnis are so stupid that they would rather be slaughtered in a civil war than reach some sort of accommodation short of a civil war? There's vicious, genocidal civil wars, and they're mild, low intensity civil wars. And if we stick around, maybe we can have the latter, and that's a big difference.
Here's what I would say: is the hope for avoiding a civil war is the hope that tensions have not already, or hatred has not already been inflamed on both sides to the point of no return. Well, as I said, we know there's a lot of dead Sunnis with relatives who are not likely to think rationally after their brothers and sisters and sons and daughters got killed. Secondly, it's tempting to think, well, but the Shiites are so calm and sober. Look, they've accepted all these mosque attacks without retaliating. But the fact is, A, as I just said, they actually are retaliating kind of covertly via their men in uniform, via the militias who have the authority of the state. B, the reason they're able to be so patient is because they know under the American plan they wind up running Iraq in the long run, and then I fear it will be payback time. So,
well, the Washington Post had an article today mocking the Bush administration because the new Iraqi army looks like the old Iraqi army. Well, if it looks like the old Iraqi army, that means it's a Sunni-dominated army, at least in the officer corps.
Well, it's certainly not.
And it's not going to be just the passive tool of Shiite vengeance that you
No, it's true
here.
that they finally started feeding Sunnis in significant numbers over the last few months, but it's nowhere near a Sunni-dominated army, and I think that's especially true of the troops that we're sending in to deal with the Sunni insurgents.
And it may not also be a terrible thing if the world sees that the fight between the Sunnis and the Shiites has nothing to do with the Americans, that it's just that they hate each other. That might not be such a terrible thing to happen. So,
come to think of it, I think you're right. We live in the best of all possible worlds, and everything is for the best.
I just think the fact that there is a civil war, it doesn't. The left says, well, there's already a civil war, as if that ended the issue. Well, the Civil War A is not so bad, and B, there's different kinds of civil wars, and if we stick around, we can have a mild civil war that leads to a crude democratic state, and that's a whole lot better than we had before.
Mickey, I'm here to help you. I'm trying to liberate you from your right-wing blog cocoon.
I'm with President Bill Clinton on this one, Bob.
President Bill Clinton has got a wife running for president who is locked into a certain position on this, and I doubt that that's randomly correlated with the things he said.
He seems sincere in this. It echoes with what he said before the war.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear you say that President
war.
Clinton is sincere. That may be the first time I've heard you say that.
But
listen, enough about bad things. Let's talk about cars, something that'll cheer you up. Cars are your life, right?
Well, I would deny that. But I like cars.
You like cars the way I like chocolate or something.
I designed my own line of cars as a child.
Did you really?
Yes.
Did you have a name for it?
The Banditti line.
Did it have a kind of Italian flair?
It looked a lot like the Bizzarini line.
How old were you?
I think I was at 12, maybe.
Huh. Do you still have it? I mean, because I think our viewers...
They're somewhere.
Our vast viewing audience, Mickey, as you know, they've shown the deepest interest into the most obscure parts of our lives. It's getting to be oppressive.
No, they haven't. But
no, I know.
But anyway, I do. They followed the classic '60s Coke bottle design. Not very innovative.
You're only 12, but what I want to ask about is General Motors. They're laying off another 70 billion Americans or something, and my question is, why cannot American cars be competitive in the world marketplace? We've had, what's it been, 30 years since the Japanese scare came or something?
Well, the answer is, it seems pretty clear to me. It's unions. The Toyota and Honda are building competitive cars in the United States with well-paid American workers. The difference between them and the General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford workers is the latter workers are unionized, which slows down all sorts of decision-making. It means that they impose these very tight work rules where you can't tell somebody doing job A to go do job B if job B needs doing because it's not in their work classification. And it just it makes it harder to fire people who aren't doing their job. It just sort of gums up the works. And as a result, the non-union shops are cleaning the clocks of the union shops.
So you think it's not
that's
about
a simple
healthcare,
paradigm that works. Sorry?
You think it's not about health care benefits?
I don't think it's about health care. I've never, health care benefits are a big drag on GM, and it would be nice if we had national health care to relieve that burden, but it's a fixed cost to GM. So if GM could build a car that made it money and help pay off those health care costs, it would do it. The problem is it can't build that car to make money. But Toyota can build that car to make money, and why is that? It's because GM is too inefficient.
So American workers in an American Toyota plant, you're saying are actually about as well off as workers in a GM plant. They just have to worry more about being fired or if they're reassigned if they screw up.
They're about as well off. They maybe make $18 an hour instead of 22 or something like that, or
that ain't
20
nothing
instead of 24.
All the hours.
Sorry?
That's not nothing.
It's not nothing. On the other hand,
that's like 15. Wait.
They have the virtue of working for an expanding, profitable company that has some margin for error, whereas in GM they're constantly under threat of having their plant closed because it's so inefficient and being assigned to someplace else. And they have a union there that's designed to take away any margin for error the management has, to give every concession in a grudging, last-minute basis. Which is, it turns out you can't compete like that. It's too slow, too cumbersome, too lumbering.
Okay, you want to hear my theory about American cars?
Sure.
It has to do with design and whether or not America is culturally inclined toward user-friendly design. I think there's something about Japanese culture, for example, that just makes... I think Japanese are brought up to be attentive to the needs of other Japanese. I mean, they wear these masks, surgical masks when they have a cold and stuff like that. I think America, where rugged individualism prevails, when people are designing something, they are less good at putting themselves in the shoes of the person who is going to use the thing they're designing. And I think you see this all over the place. I think you see it in software. That's why some of our noted software companies basically design software by just shoving a bunch of junk out the door before their competitor gets it out the door, and then everybody complains about the terrible features, and then they redesign it, to make it better, and in the course of that create a bunch of new terrible features, and that's why our software doesn't work, and so on. So that's, you going to subscribe to this theory?
I don't subscribe to the theory. There's something to it. I call it it's the sophisticated yuppie theory.
Thank you.
People have noticed that there are a lot of American cars that are actually well made now, especially, for example, Buicks. If you look at the current Consumer Reports, the Buick LaCrosse has a really good reliability score. It's as good as a Lexus. But if you look at a Buick LaCrosse, it's incredibly ugly and frumpy. It looks like it's only driven by people who wear trusses. It's just a horrible old person's car and a design disaster. So you could say, well, if they'd only styled it well, it's nothing to do with the workers. I tend to disagree. If you look at one of the other problems with the LaCrosse is it costs $30,000, which is way too much. And if you look at even reliable American cars, they tend to have very cheap materials. That's because they're trying to make up in the materials for the money they're losing in union inefficiency. And if you look at Japanese cars, they have very good materials. So it's not just a question of design. And Japanese cars have design disadvantages. I mean, their main advantage was reliability. There are some really ugly Japanese cars that have sold very well because they're reliable. And the counter-argument is that in Japan, it's so crowded that you rarely see a whole car. So you need as much sort of entertainment looking at like part of a car, because that's all you can see, as we do looking at the whole car. So Japanese designs tend not to be that clean. They tend to be very cluttered and fussy. And if you look at a beautiful American design like the new Pontiac Solstice, it's very clean and might not sell that well in Japan. Sometimes these designs that we think are nice don't sell well there. So they're at an advantage and yet at a disadvantage.
Well,
so I still blame the UAW.
Yeah, well, you're one of these people who asserts their aesthetic judgments with tremendous confidence, as if we were talking about objective truth. But that's okay. If you've designed your own line of cars.
The other problem is that the UAW is at the mercy of its locals. The national leadership of the UAW is very smart and responsible. They want to get rid of work rules sometimes, but the power in the union structure is with the locals. So the locals at a specific factory will say, no, we don't want to get rid of the work rules, and they win. The national union loses. So it's a doubly bad thing. First there's the union, and then there's the union that's powerless to even enforce a sensible rule on its locals.
Well, Mickey, as Thanksgiving approaches, you should be thankful, A, that we let you get in your cherished anti-union rant, which we'll try to do every year or so, and B, that I don't know enough about unions to have been a forceful spokesperson on behalf of America's unions.
I can only do that once a year?
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to fill up the remaining hours. We're doing better. I think I'm happy that we're doing better than the well-paid corporate employees of the Note.
How so?
Who today, Tuesday before Thanksgiving, put up something saying, "Hey, we've gone. Why don't you read yesterday's column?" So we're on the job. ABC, Mark Halperin, not on the job.
That's why we are increasingly thought of as number one, and they're increasingly thought of as number two. And you know what it gets down to, Mickey? We are here because we love the game. It isn't about the big salaries. I mean, we love our big salaries. We love our stock options. But we're here because we love the game, right?
I thought it was the salaries. So I'm in it for the money, Bob. You promised me all this money.
I'm in it because I love the game.
I have one more thing to bring up.
Okay.
I claim you were wrong yesterday or the day before when you made a big deal about how the U.S. government was claiming the right to detain American citizens in perpetuity without a trial. The main example of that was Jose Padilla, who's now been indicted, and he's going to get a trial. And the reason he's going to get a trial is because, as predicted by one party of this conversation, the U.S. Supreme Court will not allow the government to get away with holding people in perpetuity without a trial. The Bush administration knew it was going to lose, and so they've peremptorily caved, and they're giving this guy a trial, and now they're going to try to talk the Supreme Court out of hearing the case and deciding against it.
No, he's not being indicted because, as you just said, the Supreme Court, presumably under all circumstances, would side with Padilla as you predicted. He's being indicted because the Bush administration shares your view that the Supreme Court would side with Padilla, which just goes to show that they were not entertaining the scenario that I was entertaining, which is, I was not worried about what the Supreme Court would do if the case came before them today or tomorrow. I was saying if it's in the wake of a national emergency, some terrorist event even larger in scale than 9/11, then all bets are off in terms of what the Supreme Court would do so far as bolstering executive power and siding with the administration. And history just makes that completely clear. The things that Supreme Courts validate in times of national crisis, like wars, are completely different from the things they'll countenance when the nation does not feel threatened. The Japanese internment being a prime example.
But then they clamp back down when the emergency is over, and that's what
but this
the
is
Supreme
a war
Court is
that
doing
never
right now.
ends by the administration's own account, Mickey. And by the way, I mean, in terms of how judicious the executive power is that the Supreme Court would probably instinctively side with in a national crisis, that is, executive power as defined and espoused by the Bush administration, if you look at the indictment, it does not contain what the administration originally alleged, which is that they knew and had, apparently, solid evidence that he was bent on doing a terrorist act in the United States. There's no such charge in the indictment. So it turns out
that happens all the time. You think somebody's guilty of something, but you can only approve a lesser offense, so you only indict him for the lesser offense.
My point is, the guy is an American citizen. He deserves the right to a trial. The administration successfully denied him that for years and was contending that he never was due a trial. And I'm saying that if yesterday, 30,000 people had died, which could happen. 100,000 could die, 500,000 could die, and then it came before the Supreme Court, we would all be in trouble.
Well, but that will. Sometimes in emergency situations, you do have to suspend civil liberties.
And let me clarify what I mean by we'd be in trouble. I'm not so worried about them locking up me. I'm worried about them doing things that American Muslims would perceive as persecution, and that would sow the seeds of homegrown terrorism in the long run.
What you claimed was not that the Bush administration had a bad position. You claimed that Alito would approve this bad position, and I was saying anybody who's on the Supreme Court will not approve the position, and the fact that the administration was so terrified of the Supreme Court that it has now backtracked on its position is a semi-vindication of my point of view that people like even Alito will not approve of holding Padilla forever.
No, it just means the administration either was anticipating this coming before the Supreme Court in a time when when it was not in the wake of a big terrorist act, or the administration hadn't thought it through and realized that if it got a big terrorist act between now and the Supreme Court decision, it might win. It means one of those two things. And that's it. And I will countenance no opposition.
Okay, well, I'll try again.
Nothing left for you to say. I mean, I
do have things to say, but I think we've already gone for 27 minutes and 45 seconds.
Oh, but our viewers, they can't get enough, man.
I think they can.
They may already have. It may just be you and me witnessing this at this point, Mickey.
No. We're getting. I've seen the hits. We're getting millions and millions of viewers. They just don't talk about it.
No,
it's just between us and them. It's a secret thing.
They're very discreet. We have a very discerning viewership.
Yeah, I agree. It's a special bond.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, have a great Thanksgiving.
Hey, you too, man. See you.
Okay.
See you after it.
Yeah. See you next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.